Emily woke up at 6:45 a.m. to the buzzing alarm on her phone next to her bed. She hit the snooze button without thinking twice, taking advantage of the 9 extra minutes of sleep that she knew would be insufficient to alleviate the accumulated fatigue. When she finally got up, it was 7:30 a.m., late as usual. She hurriedly showered, threw on the first clothes she could find in her closet, and headed out the door without breakfast, her mind racing toward the meeting she had at 9 a.m. New York was as frenetic as she was. The honking horns, the hum of subway trains, and the hustle and bustle of people on the street created a chaotic symphony that echoed in her mind. Emily had always loved the fast pace of the city, but lately it seemed like she was struggling to keep up. Every day, there were more tasks than there were hours in the day. Her to-do list was out of control, and the pressure at work was only increasing. That particular day, Emily had an important presentation for her boss. Her anxiety was at an all-time high. As she walked down the subway stairs, she felt the weight of everything she had left behind the night before. An unfinished report, 3 important unanswered emails, and the reminder to call her mother, something that had been on her to-do list for days. When she finally found a seat on the crowded subway, she opened her phone to gather her thoughts. But instead of clarity, she was overcome by a wave of paralysis. It was always like this. Every attempt to prioritize her tasks seemed to only increase the feeling that she was failing. There were so many urgent and important things that Emily didn't know where to start. She felt a lump in her throat, a feeling that she was about to explode. What if I forget something essential? She thought. This kind of worry was constant, like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. When she got to the office, the chaos continued. Co-workers came to her desk asking for updates or requesting new reports. Emily tried to keep a smile on her face, but inside, she felt the weight of each new demand. The presentation went well, but it wasn't enough to ease her anxiety. At the end of the day, when she looked at her to-do list, she noticed that half of them were still pending. The feeling of guilt was overwhelming. This exhausting routine began to affect other areas of Emily's life. Her insomnia worsened, and she could barely remember the last time she had had a good night's sleep. She would spend hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she needed to do the next day. The cycle seemed endless. Sleepless nights, unproductive days, and a growing sense of failure. Emily also began to distance herself from the people around her. Her friends would frequently invite her to go out, but she would always decline. "I'm too busy," she would say, even though she knew the real reason was her inability to handle yet another commitment. Even her family noticed the change. Her worried mother would call regularly, but Emily would avoid the calls. "I don't want to worry anyone," she would justify to herself. At work, things started to fall apart too. One day, Emily forgot to submit a crucial report to the marketing department. When her boss found out, he called her in for a stern talking to. He was understanding, but the incident only made Emily feel even more inadequate. She began to wonder if she was really qualified for the job. "Maybe I'm just not good enough," she thought. Over the weeks, Emily's anxiety grew into something deeper. It wasn't just a fear of failure, it was a sense that she was losing control of her life. Small mistakes felt like catastrophes, and any change in her routine caused her to panic. Emily knew she needed help, but she didn't know where to start. She felt ashamed to admit to herself and to others that she wasn't up to it. One day, while scrolling through Instagram in a moment of distraction, Emily came across a post about mental health. The post read, "There's no shame in asking for help. Sometimes strength lies in acknowledging your weaknesses." The phrase hit home. She knew something had to change. Emily closed her eyes and for the first time in months made a promise to herself, "I will find a way out of this." Emily was in the middle of a week that seemed to have no end. The clock was striking 11 p.m. and she was still sitting at her small desk in her apartment. The artificial light from the lamp illuminated a stack of papers and the glow of her laptop screen, which displayed unfinished charts for an important presentation. She She knew she needed to rest, but the mere thought of going to bed without finishing her tasks made her even more anxious. Her body was showing clear signs of exhaustion. Her shoulders were tense, her back ached, and the fatigue was reflected in her eyes. But her mind insisted on going. If I can just get this done now, tomorrow will be easier, she repeated to herself like a mantra. But that tomorrow never seemed to come. Every day brought new deadlines, new demands, and a feeling that control was slipping through her fingers. That week, everything seemed to be working against her. On Monday, a spreadsheet error caused delays on a project Emily was responsible for. Her boss, though understanding, called an urgent meeting to go over the details. Emily felt sick to her stomach as she imagined the impact this would have on her reputation. She spent the night fixing the problem, but the episode had already set the tone for the next few days. On Tuesday, she forgot to call the repairman for the furnace that had broken down weeks ago. The New York winter was relentless, and the cold in her apartment only made her irritable. On Wednesday, she missed an appointment with a friend who was already upset with Emily for her constant absences. The message she received at the end of the day was short, but full of disappointment. "I feel like you don't have time for me." Emily felt a lump in her throat when she read it, but she didn't know how to respond. After all, her friend was right. Thursday was the peak of her breakdown. An important deadline arrived before she had finished her work. Her boss, clearly frustrated, had to step in to save the project. Emily spent the rest of the day trying to hide the tears that insisted on coming to her as she sat at her desk. She felt like she had failed not only at work, but at everything. When she got home that night, she collapsed on the couch. She stared at the ceiling, trying to organize her thoughts. Why am I like this? Why can't I do things like everyone else? Anxiety enveloped her like a heavy shadow, whispering that she would never be good enough. Her thoughts were a downward spiral of self-criticism, each one more cruel than the last. In addition to work, Emily found her personal life falling apart. She avoided calling her mother because she didn't want to admit that things were out of control. Friends stopped inviting her to events, perhaps tired of her excuses or absences. Even simple tasks, like shopping or organizing her apartment, became monumental tasks that required more mental energy than she could give. On Friday, while riding the subway to work, Emily had what she could only describe as a panic attack. Her heart raced, her hands became sweaty, and she felt as if the air around her had disappeared. For a moment, she thought she was having a heart attack. She had to get off at the next stop and sit on a bench to try to calm herself. People walked past her without noticing, caught up in their own routines, while Emily felt isolated in the crowd. That moment was a turning point. She realized she couldn't go on like this. Ignoring her anxiety and hoping it would go away on its own wasn't working. When she got home that night, she decided to do something she'd been putting off for weeks: research therapy. Although she felt ashamed that she couldn't deal with her problems on her own, she knew she needed help. Emily found a highly rated mental health clinic and called to make an appointment. Just making the call felt like a small triumph. The receptionist's gentle voice on the phone made her feel like she was on the right track. The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and Emily spent the weekend feeling anxious but also hopeful. In the days that followed, Emily tried to reflect on how she had gotten to this point. She realized that it wasn't just about work or deadlines. It was about the accumulated weight of years of expectations, external pressures, and her own tendency to push herself too hard. She realized that she needed more than just a quick fix. She needed a new way of living. When the day of her appointment finally arrived, Emily felt a mix of nervousness and relief as she walked into her therapist's office. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was ready to try something different. It was the first time in months that she had felt a glimmer of hope. That Tuesday morning, Emily woke up feeling a mix of nervousness and relief. It was the day of her first therapy session. Just making the appointment felt like a small step out of the hole she was in. But now, about to open up to a stranger, The anxiety she had been trying to resolve was showing signs of life. As she ate her breakfast, just a cup of black coffee and a slice of toast as usual, Emily found herself rehearsing what she would say. Where do I start? Do I talk about work? About how I feel like a failure? Or do I start with the part where I can't even sleep properly? These thoughts swirled through her mind, increasing her uneasiness. She left the apartment early, even though the appointment wasn't until 10 a.m. She didn't want to risk being late, and deep down, she needed time to mentally prepare herself. On the ride to the clinic, Emily looked at the people on the subway and wondered if any of them were also struggling with the same silent struggle. Are they as broken as I am? She thought, finding some small comfort in the possibility that she wasn't alone. When she arrived at the clinic, a small, cozy room in Midtown Manhattan, she was greeted by a receptionist who gave her a friendly smile and asked her to fill out a form. Emily sat down and began filling out the questions. What brought you here today? How would you describe your current mental health? Each word seemed like a challenge, but she managed to complete the form before she was called into the therapist's office. The therapist, Dr. Jane Parker, was a woman in her 50s with a calm, welcoming demeanor. Her voice was soothing, as if it were meant to comfort. She invited Emily to sit on the brown leather couch, offering her a bottle of water before they began. Emily, first, I want to thank you for coming in today. Just being here is an important step, Jane said, her tone encouraging. Emily nodded, but she couldn't answer right away. She was trying to control the urge to cry that was starting to build. Jane started with simple questions, allowing Emily to feel more at ease. What has your day been like? What brought you here? Emily hesitated at first, choosing her words carefully, but she soon found herself saying more than she had anticipated. She talked about her work, her never-ending to-do list, her sleepless nights, and the feeling of always being behind schedule, even when she met deadlines. I feel like I'm failing at everything, Emily confessed, her voice breaking at the end of her sentence. At work, with my friends, even with my family. It seems like the harder I try, the worse it gets. Jane listened intently, without interrupting. When Emily finished, there was a brief pause before the therapist responded. What you're feeling is more common than it seems, Emily. Many people go through exactly what you described, especially in an environment as demanding as New York. What you're going through is not a reflection of who you are, but of how your mind is dealing with the weight of so many responsibilities. Emily felt a small relief at hearing those words. For the first time in months, someone validated what she was feeling without judging her. Jane continued, what you're describing is a cycle of anxiety. Your mind is in overdrive because you can't prioritize what's really important. It feels like everything needs to be done at once, right? Emily quickly agreed. Yes, that's exactly it. I can't even get started because everything feels urgent. That's when Jane began to offer a solution. I want to teach you a technique that can help you bring more clarity and control to your day. It's called time blocking. Emily frowned curiously. Time blocking, Jane repeated with a smile. It's a way of organizing your day into blocks of time dedicated to specific tasks. Think of it as a visual planner. You divide your day like a puzzle. Each block represents a task, and each task has its own time limit. This helps your mind focus on one thing at a time instead of trying to do everything at once. The idea seemed simple, but Emily wasn't convinced. What if I can't stick to the plan? Or what if something unexpected happens? Jane smiled again. That's normal. Life is unpredictable, and the idea isn't to create a perfect system, but to give yourself a structure. Let's start small, with just one day planned. I want you to do it this week, and let me know how it goes in the next session. Are you willing to give it a try? Emily hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. She had nothing to lose. Jane then explained the basic steps. List all the tasks for the day, prioritize the most important ones, and allocate blocks of time for each one. She also stressed the importance of including time for relaxation and relaxation in her planning. When Emily left the session, she felt cautiously optimistic. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, it felt like she had a practical tool to start dealing with her anxiety. On the way home, she decided that she would try to plan her next day that very evening. When she walked into her apartment, Emily grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. With Jane's instructions in mind, she began drawing little blocks, filling each one with tasks like review report, lunch, exercise, and even watch an episode of favorite TV show. When she finished, she looked at the paper and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a slight sense of control. Little did Emily know that this simple plan would be the beginning of a profound transformation in her life. That evening, as Emily stared at the paper she had filled with time blocks, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, her to-do list seemed less daunting. The method suggested by her therapist, Jane, seemed simple, but Emily still had doubts about whether it would actually work. The next morning, she woke up a little earlier than usual. The sound of her alarm, which used to be a trigger for her morning anxiety, seemed less overwhelming. She took a deep breath and looked at the paper where she had organized her day. At the top, the first block read, 7:38, so eat breakfast and get ready for work. Emily hesitated for a moment, almost falling into the habit of ignoring her own instructions, but decided to follow the plan. As she made her coffee, she noticed something curious. Just knowing that she had a plan for the day alleviated some of her anxiety. Instead of worrying about all of her tasks at once, she focused only on what she needed to do at that moment. Maybe this really will work, she thought, feeling a slight smile form on her face. Throughout the day, Emily followed her plan as best she could. During a block of time dedicated to reviewing an important report at work, she put her phone on silent and closed all unnecessary tabs on her computer. For the first time in a long time, she was able to fully focus on the task at hand. The report was completed ahead of schedule, and Emily felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in months. However, the day wasn't perfect. During her scheduled lunch break, a colleague showed up with an urgent request. Emily, still unsure about how to handle interruptions, ended up putting her planning aside to accommodate the request. This delayed her subsequent tasks, and the feeling of losing control returned. By the end of the day, there were several blocks that she hadn't managed to complete. That evening, as she reflected on the day, Emily jotted down her impressions in a notebook. I liked having a plan, but I feel frustrated that I didn't follow through as I had imagined. Am I doing this wrong? Despite her doubts, she decided to give the technique another try. She adapted her planning for the next day, setting aside larger blocks and creating short breaks for unexpected events. Over the next few days, Emily began to notice patterns in her routine. For example, she discovered that she was most productive in the early hours of the morning and that complex tasks should be done during that time. She also realized that taking short breaks, like a quick coffee or a moment to stretch, was crucial to maintaining her energy and focus throughout the day. Time blocking, which initially felt rigid, began to adapt to her needs. A week later, during her next therapy session, Emily shared her impressions with Jane. It was weird at first, but I think it's working. I was able to finish a major project without feeling overwhelmed, and that was amazing. But I still struggle with interruptions and unexpected events. It's like I don't have complete control over my time. Jane smiled, clearly pleased with Emily's progress. That's exactly right, Emily. Time blocking isn't about total control. Life will always have unexpected events, but the goal is to create a structure that helps you deal with them. Think of your plan as a guide, not a hard and fast rule. The therapist suggested a few adjustments to help Emily deal with interruptions. Try creating flexible blocks in your day, something like unexpected time off. This can give you room to respond to unexpected requests without compromising your core tasks. And remember, there's no such thing as perfect planning. It's all about adapting. Emily followed the guidelines and, little by little, began to feel a real difference in her life. She would reserve the first few hours of the day for critical tasks and leave the afternoon for lighter activities or meetings. She even included time for hobbies in her schedule, something that had previously seemed impossible in her routine. For the first time in years, she started drawing again, a childhood passion that she had neglected due to lack of time. The impact on her personal life also began to show. Emily began to set aside blocks of time on the weekends to meet up with friends and call her mother. During these breaks, she allowed herself to completely disconnect from work, something that had previously seemed unthinkable. She discovered that the time she spent away from her tasks was not wasted. It was essential for recharging her batteries. As the weeks went by, Emily became more confident in her ability to plan and adjust her routine. The time-blocking method was not just a way to organize her day. It was a powerful tool for reducing her anxiety and regaining control over her life. There were still challenges, of course. Some days were harder than others, and setbacks happened. But now Emily had a concrete strategy for dealing with those moments. She was no longer at the mercy of chaos. She was learning to navigate it with greater clarity and balance. Looking back, Emily could hardly believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Time blocking was not just a technique. It was the beginning of a transformation that would impact every aspect of her life. That night, Emily sat at her desk with a mixed sense of hope and skepticism. The paper lay in front of her, divided into blocks that ran from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. In each segment, she had carefully written a task, inspired by her therapist's instructions. It was a simple but powerful vision, a structured routine, something she had not had in a long time. The next day began at 6:45 a.m. when her alarm clock went off. Emily got up with less hesitation than usual, remembering that her first block of time, 7 to 8 a.m., was reserved for breakfast and getting ready for work. Instead of skipping steps and rushing out the door, as she did every day, she decided to stick to the plan. She made herself a cup of coffee and ate some avocado toast, and was surprised at how much of a difference that slow start to her day made. By the time she got to work, her mind was a little clearer. At 9 a.m., the block of time to review the report began. Emily had decided that this would be her first big task of the day, something that always made her anxious. This time, instead of opening all her browser tabs and responding to emails in the middle of the process, she closed everything that wasn't essential and focused solely on the document. The work flowed more smoothly than she had anticipated. Every time she felt tempted to stray, she reminded herself of the goal of that block of time, to finish the report before 11:00 a.m. By the time the clock struck 10:45, Emily had not only completed the task, but had also revised parts of it with a care she had not been able to devote before. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control. However, not everything went as planned. At 11 a.m., during the block reserved for answering emails, a co-worker appeared at her desk with an urgent request. "Emily, we need to review these numbers before the 2 p.m. meeting," he said, his tone worried. Emily knew this was not in her plan, but she couldn't ignore it either. Trying to stay calm, she mentally adjusted her schedule, moving the email task to the next block. These small changes were inevitable throughout the day. The 1 p.m. block of time that was originally intended for lunch ended up being shortened to accommodate another interruption. Emily realized that she couldn't always follow the plan exactly, but she still felt that time blocking was helping. Having a clear structure made the changes seem less chaotic. As the day drew to a close, Emily reviewed her experience. Some tasks had been completed successfully, while others had needed to be adjusted or postponed. Most importantly, however, she felt less overwhelmed and more in control. Despite the interruptions, she had accomplished more than she had imagined possible. That evening, Emily took a few minutes to plan the next day. She pulled out her notebook and adjusted her blocks based on what she had learned. She now included a free time for unexpected events block in the late morning and another in the mid-afternoon. These adjustments gave her a sense of flexibility, something she found was crucial to making the method work. The next day, the experience was even better. Planning no longer felt like a chore, but something second nature. Over lunch, a co-worker commented, "You seem different, Emily. More focused, maybe." Emily laughed and replied, "I'm trying something new. It's too early to tell if it will work, but I'm already feeling better." As the days went on, Emily began to notice other benefits of time blocking. She realized that her productivity didn't just come from putting in the work, but also from setting aside time for real breaks. Before, she would spend her breaks scrolling through her phone, feeling guilty for not doing something useful. Now, her break blocks included intentional activities, like taking a short walk or simply having a coffee away from her desk. By the end of the first week, Emily felt motivated enough to share her experience with Jane, her therapist. During the session, she described the challenges and triumphs of the week. It was hard at first, especially with the interruptions, but I liked the feeling of having a plan. I think the most important thing is that I don't feel so lost anymore. I still have a lot of room for improvement, but at least I'm starting. Jane praised Emily's progress. "You're discovering something very important, Emily. Time blocking isn't just about productivity. It's a way to take care of your mind, to create space to breathe. You're learning to prioritize not only your tasks, but also yourself." These words stuck with Emily. For a long time, she believed that she needed to dedicate herself to work and responsibilities as much as possible, even if it meant neglecting her own mental health. Time blocking was showing her that the two could coexist. By the end of that week, Emily felt that something had changed. It wasn't just the way she organized her day, it was the way she saw herself. Chaos still existed around her, but for the first time she had a tool to deal with it. In the second week of trying time blocking, Emily woke up with a feeling of slight confidence. Her first contact with the technique had been promising, but she knew she was still far from mastering it. Despite this, there was something different in his mindset, the belief that he could finally find a way to control the chaos that had, for so long, dictated his life. The day started off well. She followed her morning routine, checked the time block she had planned the night before, and headed to work, determined to apply the method to its full potential. Her morning went smoothly. Emily managed to review reports, respond to emails, and even set aside time to plan an upcoming project. However, things started to change around 11:30 a.m. when she received an unexpected message from her boss. "We need to discuss an issue with the marketing campaign data. Meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes. Emily felt her heart race. The meeting wasn't on her schedule, and she knew it would have a knock-on effect on the rest of the day. She mentally adjusted her blocks, but as she did so, she realized she would have to postpone two important tasks. This change brought back the old feeling of losing control. Does this method really work? She thought as she walked to the conference room. The conversation with her boss lasted longer than expected, and when she left, Emily realized she was already late for the next block of time. She tried to get back to planning, but the interruptions continued. Colleagues came up with questions and requests, and Emily, still lacking the confidence to say no, ended up taking on more responsibilities than she should have. By the end of the day, much of her schedule had been ignored, and her frustration was palpable. Back at her apartment that night, Emily looked at the notebook where she kept track of her time blocks. The pages were full of crossed out and hasty notes. "I failed again," she thought, as tears began to flow. She felt defeated, as if the technique that had seemed so promising had been yet another disappointment in her fight against anxiety. However, instead of abandoning the method, Emily decided to bring her concerns to Jane in her therapy session that week. When describing what had happened, she was unapologetic about herself. "I'm terrible at this. I can't even follow a simple schedule. Something always goes wrong." and I end up back in the same old cycle. Jane listened patiently and responded in a reassuring tone. Emily, what you're going through is completely normal. Time blocking is not a magic formula that will eliminate all of life's problems. It's a tool, and like any tool, it takes time to learn how to use it. What you see as failures are actually opportunities to understand what works and what needs to be adjusted. These words were a relief to Emily. Jane suggested that she review the past week and identify the times when the plan worked, as well as those when it needed to be changed. Remember that flexibility is key. The goal isn't to follow the schedule exactly, but to create a structure that helps you navigate the unexpected. Back at her apartment, Emily decided to follow this advice. She opened her notebook and started to review the previous days. She realized that, despite the interruptions, she had managed to complete important tasks. She also noticed that the most successful time blocks were those that included room for adjustments. Maybe the problem isn't the technique, but my expectation that everything should be perfect, she reflected. Over the next few days, Emily made small changes to her schedule. She added specific blocks for unexpected events, set aside more time for complex tasks, and started saying no to some non-urgent demands. It was difficult at first, but each small victory boosted her confidence. One such day, Emily was at work when a co-worker came in with a last-minute request. She looked at her schedule and realized that accepting it would compromise an important task. She took a deep breath and said, "I really want to help you, but I'm in the middle of something right now. Can I look at this later after 3 p.m.? To her surprise, her colleague responded positively, "Sure, no problem." The feeling of saying no without guilt was liberating. Emily realized that time blocking was not only a way to organize tasks, but also a way to set boundaries. By prioritizing what was important to her, she was learning to value herself. The following week, when she met with Jane, Emily was in a more optimistic tone. "I still had some rough days, but I feel like I'm starting to understand how to make this work. I'm realizing that it's not about being perfect, but about being consistent." Jane smiled. "That's right, Emily. Consistency is more powerful than perfection. Every day you try, even if it's not perfect, is a step in the right direction. Time blocking is like building a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger it gets." Emily left the session with a renewed sense of purpose. The failures of the previous week, which had once felt like defeats, were now valuable lessons. Every adjustment she made to her plan was a sign of progress, proof that she was adapting and growing. She knew the journey would be long, but for the first time in a long time, she felt capable of facing it. Time blocking had become more than a technique. It was a new way of approaching life, with patience, flexibility, and the courage to keep trying. In her third week of practicing time blocking, something remarkable began to happen in Emily's routine. Small moments of clarity and control began to add up, creating a sense of progress she hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't perfect, but unlike the previous weeks, Emily began to see her accomplishments, even when her plans didn't go exactly as expected. Monday started with the same usual rush, but this time Emily was more prepared. She had adjusted her schedule the night before, incorporating larger blocks for complex tasks and intentional breaks for rest. When she arrived at work, she opened her notebook and checked off the first block of the day, reviewing the sales report for the afternoon meeting. With her phone on silent and her email tab closed, Emily dove into the task. She found that concentration was easier to achieve when she had a specific window of time to complete the work. "I just have to focus until 11 a.m., she thought, which made the task less daunting. When she looked at the clock, the report was complete, with 15 minutes to spare. This moment of victory, however small, filled Emily with energy. During her coffee break, something she had neglected before, she took the opportunity to reflect on how she felt. The difference was clear. Planning gave her a sense of direction that she had previously lacked, and this was starting to positively impact her mood and confidence. That afternoon, during the meeting with her boss, Emily presented her report clearly and objectively. At the end, she received a compliment that, although brief, made her feel that she was on the right track. "Good job, Emily. This will really help us in our final decision." She thanked him, feeling valued. It was the first time in a long time that she had left a meeting without questioning whether she had done enough. The week continued with other small triumphs. One of them was when Emily managed to say no to a request that was not part of her responsibilities. Before, she would have accepted automatically, fearing that she would seem disinterested or incapable. But when she reviewed her schedule and realized that it would compromise important tasks, she politely responded, "Unfortunately, I can't take on that right now, but maybe someone else can help." The response was well received, and Emily felt an immediate sense of relief. She was learning to protect her time. By the end of the week, Emily had started to notice changes outside of work. On Friday night, she had planned a block of time to have dinner with a friend she hadn't seen in months. Over dinner, Emily shared her experience with time blocking. "You know, it sounds so simple, but it's really helped me. It's like I finally have some breathing room." The friend, who had been worried about Emily for months, was surprised by the change. "I can see that you're more relaxed. It's good to see you like this." These words touched Emily deeply. For a long time, she had felt distant from the people around her, but now she was finding ways to reconnect. Another triumph came on Saturday, when Emily set aside a block of time to take care of herself. Instead of trying to fill her day with tasks or commitments, she decided to dedicate the morning to something she loved but hadn't done in years: drawing. She pulled out her old art supplies from her closet, sat down at her desk, and began sketching. For 2 hours, she immersed herself in the activity, forgetting about everything else around her. When she finished, she felt a sense of satisfaction that came not just from drawing, but from the conscious choice to prioritize something that made her happy. On Sunday, Emily set aside part of the day to review her week and adjust her schedule for the coming days. Sitting at her desk with her notebook, she reflected on the small victories she had achieved, completing her report ahead of schedule, receiving praise at work, reconnecting with a friend, and most importantly, finding time for herself. "I still have a lot of room for improvement, but I'm on the right track," she thought, as she adjusted her blocks to include more self-care time. The following Monday, during her session with Jane, Emily shared these experiences. "I feel like I'm starting to make peace with my time. I can't follow the plan perfectly every day, but I still feel more in control." Jane smiled, clearly proud. "That's wonderful, Emily. The most important thing is not perfection, but consistency. And you're learning to celebrate your achievements, no matter how small. That's key to the process." Jane also suggested that Emily start recording her small victories in a journal. By writing down what went well, you reinforce the idea that you can make progress, even in the face of challenges. Over time, this will build your confidence and help you deal with the tough days. Emily liked the idea, and that same night, she began recording her achievements. "I completed the report ahead of time," she wrote on the first page. "I said no to an extra task and felt good about it. I had dinner with a friend without worrying about work." As she filled in the lines, she felt a surge of gratitude for making progress. These small victories, which had previously gone unnoticed, now held a special place in her mind. Emily knew the journey would be long, but each step forward was proof that she was on the right track. The changes in Emily's routine began to spill over into other areas of her life. She realized that as she learned to organize her time at work, she was also able to make room for things that had long been neglected: friends, family, and even her forgotten hobbies. Small actions that had previously seemed impossible, like setting aside an evening to relax or allowing herself a guilt-free day, were now being incorporated into her schedule. On the first Friday after weeks of practicing time blocking, Emily finished her workday on time, a rarity in the past few months. Instead of getting bogged down by mounting deadlines or unfinished tasks, she left the office with a sense of accomplishment. The clock struck 6:30 p.m., when she decided to do something she hadn't done in a long time. Take a leisurely walk through the streets of New York. The crisp night air and vibrant city lights seemed more inviting than ever. As she walked, Emily reflected on how much more present she felt. Before, her mind would have been full of worries. The email she hadn't responded to yet, the report she needed to review, what her boss might think. But tonight, her mind was calm. She passed a bookstore and on impulse went in. Strolling the aisles, she found a book on personal organization and productivity. She picked it up, thinking about how she could integrate new ideas with what she was already learning. It was a simple but meaningful moment, a reminder that she was enjoying life again. That weekend, Emily put something on her schedule that she had long ignored, calling her mother. They had always had a good relationship, but in recent months, Emily had been distancing herself, afraid that her mother would notice her fragility. At 4 p.m. on Saturday, as planned in her notebook, she dialed the number. The warm, familiar voice on the other end of the line brought a wave of comfort. "Emily, what a nice surprise. I thought you had forgotten about me," her mother said, her tone playful but full of longing. "I would never forget, Mom. I've just been a little lost the last few months," Emily replied, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. They talked for almost an hour. Emily told her about work, therapy, and how she was learning to organize her life better. Her mother, always a supportive figure, praised her courage. "I'm so glad you're taking care of yourself, honey. That's the most important thing." After the call, Emily felt a relief she didn't know she needed. It was as if, by reconnecting with her mother, she had reconnected with an essential part of herself. She decided to make these calls a regular part of her schedule, a block dedicated to family. Another area that began to change was Emily's relationship with her friends. For months, she had avoided meeting up, blaming it on lack of time or the need to rest, when in reality, what was keeping her away was the fear of putting herself out there. Now, with time blocking helping to balance her routine, she has started saying yes to invitations that she would have previously declined. On Saturday night, Emily met 3 friends at a restaurant she used to frequent. As soon as she walked in, she felt a familiar warmth. "Look who decided to show up," joked Sam, one of her oldest friends. Emily laughed, still a little unsure but happy to be there. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't worry about what was coming next. She was there laughing at jokes and sharing stories. During dinner, one of her friends commented, "You seem different, Emily, more relaxed. What's changed?" Emily hesitated for a moment, but decided to share her journey. She told them about time blocking, therapy, and how she was learning to balance work and life. "That sounds amazing," said Anna, another friend in the group. "I should try something like that. I feel like I'm always rushing around and never getting anything done." Emily was surprised by the positive response. Sharing her experience not only made her feel understood, but it also gave her a new perspective on how far she had come. She left the dinner feeling light-hearted, promising herself that she would never again put her relationships on hold. The most profound shift, however, was happening within her. Emily began to realize that her time was a reflection of her priorities. Before, everything had revolved around work, but now she saw the value in investing in herself and the people she loved. Her planned breaks were no longer moments of guilt, but of recovery and joy. On Sunday, Emily decided to set aside a block for something she had always wanted to do: cook a new recipe. She grabbed a cookbook that had been gathering dust on her shelf, went to the grocery store, and spent the afternoon preparing an elaborate meal. As she cooked, she felt light, almost as if she were meditating. When she finally tasted the dish, she laughed to herself. It wasn't perfect, but the process had been incredibly satisfying. That night, as she reviewed her week's plan and filled out her achievement journal, Emily wrote, "I found time for life." That simple phrase captured what she was discovering. Time blocking wasn't just about productivity, it was about living with more intention. Over the weeks, this idea took hold. Emily began to realize that her anxiety wouldn't magically disappear, but it could be managed. Each block on her calendar represented a choice: to take care of her work, the people around her, and most importantly, herself. Emily knew the journey was just beginning, but for the first time, she felt empowered to move forward. Emily was beginning to reap the rewards of her new approach to time. Her routine was more organized. Her anxiety seemed less overwhelming, and moments of relaxation and self-care were finally becoming a part of her life. However, as with any significant transformation, challenges soon resurfaced. It all started on a Wednesday, in the middle of a seemingly uneventful week. Emily had planned her day precisely as she had done for the past few weeks, but a series of unexpected events tested her patience and her trust in the method. In the morning, while she was reviewing an important presentation for a client meeting, the company's IT system went down. The interruption forced Emily to rearrange her entire schedule, postponing tasks to fit the review into another time. By the time she was finally able to resume her presentation, she was already late for her next appointment, a meeting with her boss. During the conversation, he requested last-minute changes to a project that was due the next day. "I'm going to need you to work on this today," he said, gently but firmly. Emily nodded, but her mind began to calculate the blocks of time that would be sacrificed to accommodate this new task. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Emily tried to mentally adjust her schedule, but with so many interruptions, she felt like she was slipping back into her old habits, rushing from one task to the next, lacking focus and feeling increasingly exhausted. When the day was over, she looked at her planning notebook and saw that almost none of the planned blocks had been completed. Frustration set in. When she got home, Emily dropped her bag on the couch and collapsed into the kitchen chair. She grabbed her planning notebook and began to scribble, trying to find where she had gone wrong. Emotions came flooding back. Why does this always happen? Will I ever be able to truly control my time? Tears began to flow as she stared at the scribbled pages. The next day, Emily brought her concerns to her therapist, Jane. With a shaky voice, she explained what had happened and how defeated she felt. "It's like I'm going backwards. All the progress I've made seems to have disappeared." Jane listened attentively, and after a moment she responded in a reassuring tone, "Emily, it's important to remember that progress is not linear. Having a difficult day or even a difficult week doesn't mean you've failed. It's part of the process." These words calmed Emily, but she was still unsure. "So how should I deal with this? It seems like when things get out of control, my entire plan falls apart." Jane explained that unforeseen events are inevitable, and that the key to dealing with them is flexibility. Time blocking is a structure, not a prison. Think of it as a safety net. Even if you fall, it's there to help you get back on track. Instead of trying to follow the plan exactly, ask yourself, what is really essential today? Focus on that and adjust the rest as needed. Emily thought about this and decided to apply the advice immediately. She returned to work with a renewed mindset, accepting that perfect planning was impossible, but that over time, she began to incorporate small adjustments to her approach. She added larger blocks of time for important tasks, allowing for leeway in case something unexpected came up. She also began breaking down large projects into smaller steps so that she could easily return to them even after interruptions. A turning point came on a chaotic Friday. Emily had planned to finish reviewing a critical report that morning, but an urgent client issue took up most of the day. By the time she finally got around to it, she was exhausted. Rather than force herself to finish it that day, she decided to move the task to the next day, adjusting other blocks to make room. While this would have been a guilt-ridden decision before, it now felt like the right choice. This mindset shift began to change the way Emily viewed her time. She realized that flexibility was not a sign of weakness, but of resilience. By accepting that not everything would go as planned, she was significantly reducing her anxiety and learning to deal with challenges in a healthier way. Another important adjustment was learning to prioritize the tasks that mattered most. Emily began using a simple technique Jane suggested, listing her top 3 priorities for the day. Even if the rest of her plan needed to be changed, those 3 tasks were the main focus. This method gave Emily a sense of accomplishment, even on the most difficult days. The following week, during her weekly review, Emily realized something remarkable. Despite the setbacks and adjustments, she had completed almost all of the essential tasks for the week. Most importantly, she felt less overwhelmed and more in control. "Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect to work," she wrote in her achievement journal. Over time, Emily began to see setbacks not as failures, but as learning opportunities. Each time something went wrong, she adjusted her planning and expectations, becoming more confident and adaptable. Jane, in one of her sessions, reinforced this progress. "Emily, you are learning to navigate life's uncertainties with more grace. This is something many people spend years trying to do. You should be proud of how you are handling these situations." These words stuck with Emily. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, but now she felt she had the tools to face them. Time blocking was no longer just an organizing technique. It was a reflection of her new approach to life, flexible, resilient, and above all, intentional. The following months were transformative for Emily. The consistent practice of time blocking not only brought more organization to her routine, but also awakened a sense of control and autonomy that she didn't know she had. Lessons learned from mistakes and adjustments along the way helped her refine the technique and adapt it to her lifestyle. At first, Emily saw time blocking as a way to survive her anxiety, but now she was beginning to see it as a tool for personal growth. Her life was no longer ruled by chaos or external demands. She finally felt like she was in control. The big change came when Emily decided to take the technique to a deeper level, integrating all areas of her life into her planning. It wasn't just about organizing work or dealing with immediate responsibilities, but about creating a more balanced and meaningful life. Emily discovered that the first few hours of the day were crucial in setting the tone for the next few. Inspired by books she had recently read about productivity and well-being, she began to structure an intentional morning routine. The first few blocks of her day were dedicated to herself, meditation, exercise, and planning her day. This change had an immediate impact. "When I start the day with self-care, the rest of the day seems to flow more smoothly," she wrote in her journal. Her mind felt clearer, and the morning anxiety that had previously been a constant had significantly diminished. As Emily reviewed her weekly planning, she began to notice patterns. For example, the biggest milestone in her evolution was her ability to balance the different areas of her life. Now, her time blocks were not just dedicated to work. There was room for hobbies, meeting up with friends, long conversations with her mother, and even short weekend trips. One day, Emily took an entire day to explore a park outside of the city. With no email notifications or work messages, she walked along the trails, breathing in the fresh air and admiring the nature around her. "This is what time is for," she thought. In that moment, she realized that time blocking had done more than organize her routine. It had restored her ability to live fully. Looking back on her first few months of practicing, Emily was amazed at how much she had changed. What had started as an attempt to manage anxiety had become a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. The tools she had learned from Jane and applied along the way were now part of who she was. Emily knew she would still face difficult days, but she no longer feared the future. With time blocking, she had discovered not just a technique, but a lifestyle that helped her navigate uncertainty with more grace and confidence. In the months that followed, Emily became a new person. The chaos that once dominated her life was replaced by intentional balance. With time blocking, she not only reorganized her routine, but also her way of thinking about time, priorities, and most importantly, herself. A final milestone in her journey came during a conversation with her therapist, Jane. Emily came into the session with a different energy. Jane, for the first time in years, I feel like I have control over my life. I still have tough days, but now I have tools to deal with them. Jane smiled, pleased. Emily, what you've achieved is more than control. You've built a life that aligns with what truly matters to you. That's something few people achieve, and you should be proud of that. Emily reflected on this conversation as she walked home. For the first time, she realized that it wasn't just about managing tasks, but about creating space for the things that made her life worth living. It was about making time for herself, for the people she loved, and for the things that made her happy.